You now know why the British had to leave us alone. If Gandhi was so problematic with a simple wedding, can you imagine what he must have done to the Brits? It's a very, as I said earlier at the Jaipur Literature Festival, very few books walk through the corridors of history, stringing along romance in the manner that this book does. All the characters were oddballs. I mean, Hitler was abnormal, Gandhiji was not of the norm. I don't think Lakshmi would ever believe her parents were normal. I don't think Lakshmi is normal, neither is her husband. They're an eclectic family, so you've got to see and visualize an eclectic story, which is why the book is interesting. Having said that, Urvashi herself is not a normal publisher. I mean, she publishes normally, but you know what I mean. Two passages. In fact, my father had mentioned Conrad von Molo's name several times. I believe they stayed in touch with each other even after World War II. Conrad von Molo was a film director who had worked closely with Fritz Lang and Thea von Harbu on several projects. I remember being told that Thea von Harbu had come across an article written by my father on India and was curious to meet him. Conrad told them both about the other, and Thea invited my father to her house. After I read Sigmund's account, I realized it was very similar to what my father had told me. At that time, I hadn't paid much attention to his story, but now, as I thought back, the details came to me, and here's what he said. On the evening in question, my father said he found himself outside Thea's house. Nervously, he rang the doorbell, wondering how he had allowed himself to get talked into coming to this place. He'd come straight from work, couldn't entirely explain what he was doing there, nor could he possibly conceive of what he might say to her. He waited patiently until the door was opened. A middle-aged woman stood in front of him, dressed in black. Tendulkar was a bit confused. This wasn't what he had imagined Thea would look like. Frau Habu, I'm I Tendulkar, he said. He extended his hand to greet her, but instead of a reciprocal gesture, the woman asked him to enter the drawing room. It held a collection of carpets, rugs, masks, wall hangings, figurines from all over the world. He turned around as if to make polite conversation about the artifacts when the woman spoke. Please do sit down. Frau Habu will join you shortly. I'm her secretary, she's expecting you. Tendulkar felt a little foolish at having mistaken this middle-aged secretary for the renownedly beautiful Thea. He sat down a little intimidated by the plush interiors. The walls were lined with art. There was an abstract painting by the Austrian painter Egon Schiele. The room was warm and sensual, the windows draped with heavy silk curtains. There were Japanese masks, Siamese temple flags, Chinese sacramental vessels, a grand piano, and an expanse of bookshelves. A huge Tibetan carpet replete with fiery dragons and cryptic symbols hung on the wall facing him. From a distant kitchen, the aroma of hot, freshly baked cake wafted through the entire drawing room, whetting his appetite. Tendulkar was lost in his observations when Thea entered. She wore a blue dress that ended at her knees. It was a crisp shade that brought out the light blue color of her eyes. A small black terrier followed her every move and then went straight to Tendulkar, sniffing him suspiciously. Tendulkar stood up immediately. Thea stretched out her arms and surprised him with a warm, friendly hug. Herr Tendulkar, I feel like I already know you through your many articles on India. Welcome to my home and thank you for the honor, she said. They sat down on easy chairs facing each other. Tendulkar felt a little out of place. He became conscious of his frayed collar, his general disheveled look. Sensing his discomfort, Thea made a lot of small talk until finally they slipped into conversation, and even the black terrier decided that the guest was harmless and started to ignore him. Conrad has been telling me a lot about you. He really values your friendship, said Thea. He's also been telling me about the current developments in India, and I must say I'm fascinated by all he tells me. India, the sleeping giant, finally awakens. It is no longer the mystical land of snakes and magicians. I'm very interested in hearing about Mahatma Gandhi. I know you must think that we Germans are hard-hearted and only believe in force, but that isn't true. There are many of us who want peace and harmony, who respect Gandhi's philosophy of non-violence. We're prepared to learn from the East if we can. Tell me, El Tendulkar, have you met or interviewed Gandhi? Tendulkar was impressed with Thea's impeccable English, although her German accent was quite strong. Mine is pretty wrong. He'd expected her to be older, but she appeared to be in her mid-40s, and her enthusiasm was infectious. He'd never met anyone quite like her. She had a feminine charm that he was drawn to, yet she was very emphatic in her views and thoughts. Her steel blue eyes soaked in everything, every tiny detail. And he could sense her nervous energy. He was seduced by her elegance and her aura. It's a long story, Frau Abu. I'm surprised that you're even interested in hearing it, he said. Of course I'm interested, but my wish to visit your country one day. I've been so fascinated with India ever since I was a girl, but I must insist that you do not call me Frau Harbo. Call me Thea, like your friend Conrad does, she said. Thea was 17 years older than Tendulkar, but when they both looked at each other, it was as though any difference in their age and background had dissolved. Thea, it will be my honor to call you that. Please call me Ai. My first name is actually Gampa, but Germans find it too strange. Though initially Thea seemed a little distant and now she appeared warm and affectionate, she spoke very little about herself. Never mentioned how successful a career as a scriptwriter had been. She seemed like the perfect hostess, domestic, maternal, sophisticated, and sensitive. The maid brought in tea and an assortment of cakes and sandwiches. His hands trembled as he drank the tea. She watched him intently, and realizing he was hungry, she piled pastries and sandwiches on his plate while eating very little herself. Tendulkar told her about his experiences in Sabarmati Ashram as a young boy and the impact that Gandhi had on the freedom movement. Tell me more, Ai. How on earth have you managed to survive for so long in a country so far removed from your dear India? She asked. Tendulkar told her about his time as a student, where he studied during the day, worked in a factory at night. It was a Herculean task, working on a PhD while also holding a job. From what he told her, he was fluent in both German and French. His manners, too, were impeccable. He didn't seem like a foreigner, wasn't clumsy or starstruck around her, as most people were. She was surprised by how suavely he carried himself and the elegance with which he spoke. She was drawn to him. He was handsome, though not in the Germanic way that she was accustomed to. All in all, there was something very sincere about him. She told him she recognized his ambition, his deeply rooted desire to achieve something in his life. She invited him to stay for dinner, during which they continued talking about his university days. They bade each other good night, and Tendulkar made his way to his car, realizing he was completely captivated by this woman who was 17 years his senior. She made him feel special. Until this evening, he'd been convinced that he had mapped out the course of his life, would return to India sooner or later. Suddenly, none of that seemed to matter. What he was excited about was Thea's request that he meet her at the film studio at Bubblesburg the next morning. He was already anticipating his next encounter, wondering what time would be appropriate to get there. A few weeks after this successful evening, Thea left on an official film promotion tour. She traveled all over Germany, made stops in several cities and was gone for weeks. Tendulkar missed her badly and decided to make sure there were always flowers to greet her in every hotel room she was scheduled to stay in. She rang him up the first time she received the flowers. By the time it had happened 6 times, she was completely overwhelmed. His kindness and his attention left her speechless. Sorry, the good stuff about smoking. This was the first time that Indumati would have had a one-to-one audience with Mahatma Gandhi. She was quite nervous and was unsure what she would say to him. She missed having Tendulkar by her side. He was her strength. She began to think she had perhaps been too rash in leaving her parents' home, that the statement her actions had made was just too far-reaching, and that she'd probably have to bear the consequences. Yet she was aware that her father had not asked her to choose between the family and Tendulkar. She would probably not have taken such a drastic step, and in the manner in which she had. You are so kind. Thank you. Whenever you mention Gandhi, kindness occurs. She had understood both her father's plight, though the fact that both her brothers couldn't join the army because of her political activities, and the whole town was abuzz with rumors of her affair. Although she was touched by her father's concern, Indumati was also somewhat upset that her father had decided to involve Gandhi in what was essentially a family matter. When Indumati was shown into Gandhi's quarters, his eyes lit up through his steel-framed glasses as he smiled and signaled to her to sit down. His wife was sitting beside him, while Madhavbai took a seat in front of Gandhi. Indumati immediately felt at ease in his presence. She could see that Gandhi's body had taken the toll of all the fasting and the political uncertainty. He seemed terribly frail, all skill and bone. Indumati had heard that he walked 4 or 5 miles every morning at a pace so brisk it was difficult to keep pace with him. He wore a loosely wrapped dhoti and a coarsely spun white shawl, which he hung over his bony shoulders. Indu was awestruck by the humility of this man who had almost single-handedly managed to shake the foundations of the British Empire. She addressed him as if though she was speaking to her father, and quickly decided to bear a heart to this thin, small man who ruled India's heart. Despite knowing his views about sex, she didn't hide the details about her relationship with Tendulkar. Gandhi sat spinning as he listened patiently to her words without commenting on one of them. When she had finished, he stopped spinning and looked into her eyes. "Does Dr. Tendulkar want to marry you, Betty?" he said. Without waiting for her to respond, he continued, "Are you sure that your service and your sacrifice for the country will be realized by marrying him? Betty, he has an exciting background. But what do you know of Europe? Why do you want to take such a big risk? Why don't you devote your life to the country instead? You could live here and save our ground. The country needs more people like you." Indumati knew that Gandhi had placed service to the country above everything else. She too had worked selflessly for many years, but things had changed since she'd met Tendulkar. She now felt it was doubly important that she marry Tendulkar in order that her family could save face. She held up her chin almost defiantly and quietly but resolutely said, "Bapuji, I will work for the country and do whatever is required of me. But Bapuji, Tendulkar has agreed to marry me and I cannot refuse him. I want to have a family and bring up children. I will wait for him." Bapu and the others were amazed to see the spirit of this young woman who had made up her mind and who resolutely defied everyone around her. "Indumati, you tell me that Tendulkar is unofficially married to a German lady, what's her name, Thea? Dear one Habu, said Indumati. Yes, the German authorities would not allow their marriage to take place officially. Well, then I would also request you that before we make any decision regarding your marriage with Tendulkar, you must show me a letter from this woman saying she had no objections to Tendulkar marrying you. Yes, Babuji, I will ask Tendulkar to get a letter from her. All the correspondence between Germany and India is quite difficult at the moment. Betty, I think you must meditate on what you want. I would also like you to give us a little time until we can resolve the issue, said Gandhi. Indumati joined both her hands in a namaste and left Gandhi's hut. Thank you.